Good afternoon and welcome to SGIA and Printing Industries of America's joint webinar on walking working surfaces regulation looking at ladder safety. I appreciate everybody's attendance today, and this is the second webinar in our series. We held the first webinar just looking at the overview of the walking working surfaces regulation recently issued by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And today we're going to delve a little deeper into ladder safety. And then on the 21st of June, we will have the final webinar in this series on fall protection. So I'm really excited that we're going to be talking about ladders. And as Gary Jones and I were discussing earlier, you learn a lot more about ladders than you think. So my name is Marcy Kinter, and I'm the Vice President of Government and Business Information for SGIA, and I will be your moderator today. So our speaker today is Gary Jones, who is the Assistant Vice President for Environmental Safety and Health Affairs at the Printing Industries of America. Hey, Gary, glad you're able to join us.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be here.
Because this is what we like to do. Gary and I have worked together for many years and have worked on many different regulatory packages together. So we're really glad that SGIA and PIA are able to present this program to both of you, to everyone out there. So a little bit about our website logistics. So all attendees are muted. If you do have a question or comment, you see the question or comment box. Please go ahead and submit the question at any point, and we will answer them all at the end of the program. Our program is being recorded, and we will go ahead and make that available to you. I also want to point out to you the handouts that are available today here on the program. We do have the ladder compliance checklist as well as the ladder per use inspection checklist that was developed by both SGIA and PIA for your use. A copy of the slides can be found at the bottom under the lovely name of Ladder Webinar Slides. And then Gary also has provided a couple of flyers for you from OSHA that give a little bit more in-depth information on fixed and portable ladders. So with that, I turn that over to Gary to go ahead and start the program. So Gary, it's all yours.
All right. Well, thank you, Marcy. I'm so glad everyone could make it. We're very pleased that you took time from your busy day to sit in on a webinar on ladder safety. And as I was talking, Marcy and I were chatting earlier, I mentioned that there were a few things, even though I had been using ladders probably my entire adult life. And prior to that, there were a few things that I learned about ladders as I was going through and preparing for today's program. So I thought it was actually may serve as a refresher for you. You may be very familiar with ladders. You may not be familiar with ladders, so you may not use them, or you may have seen them. Really, to me, I think it serves as an important part of your overall safety program. So what we're going to do here is we're going to talk about introduction, really what's driving why we're doing this, and that's primarily OSHA's changes to the regulations, which is the entire series we're doing. Some general requirements. We're going to look at inspections, very important part of the change in the rules, and then we'll delve into portable ladders, which we'll be looking at also straight ladders as well as step ladders, and a little bit on ladder safety. This is clearly not going to be an exhaustive discussion, but key points on ladder safety. At the end, we'll talk about fixed ladders. In fact, we're getting more questions about fixed ladders from our members because of the focus that OSHA has on ladders in general. So why we're here? We're here because the walking and working surfaces regulation was revised. In fact, it was an extensive revision to the regulation. It was over 20 some years in the making. Became effective January 17th of 2017. So we've been living with this rule for quite some time. I do have to say OSHA is a bit aggressive with this regulation. We've seen some, not in printing yet that I've seen citations. I've seen citations for other industries that have been quite significant and quite costly because the companies weren't meeting the requirements for the overall walking working services rule. But essentially what the regulation addresses is everywhere an employee is going to stand, walk, traverse, gains access. It's going to be steps, floors, platforms, roofs, a whole bunch of things. Anywhere where an employee is going to stand in your facility is covered by this regulation. It is rather significant and it is quite extensive. As, of course, the title of the webinar for today is focusing on ladders, we're going to look at what those requirements are for fixed and portable ladders. And then the other webinar in this series is going to do a deep dive in on fall protection. So I thought I'd like to maybe start our webinar off with this video. Ladders can take us to great heights or allow us to take a quick trip to the ground. What's interesting is if you look and look close at this video, there's the person who is on this ladder, unfortunately falls off this ladder quite a great distance, is violating really at least two of the requirements that OSHA has established with ladders, and we're gonna delve into those specifics. Most common causes of ladder accidents. Well, there's not a particular order in terms of priority, but selecting the wrong type of ladder, using worn or damaged ladders. In fact, we do see this a lot. We do a fair number of audits at our members' facilities, and we do come across frequently worn and damaged ladders, which should actually need to be taken out of service. Incorrect use of ladders and an incorrect placement of ladders. So the four broad categories are those in terms of where we see the types of accidents. From a statistical perspective, and this is something that I had not realized, and again, you learn when you do a deep dive. Consumer Product Safety Commission. Now, these statistics cover both industrial as well as home use and other uses of ladders, but on average, more than 90,000 people receive emergency room treatment from ladder-related injuries every year. So that averages out to about 250 people per day. And unfortunately, there is a lot of fatalities that are associated with people falling off ladders or incidents involving ladders. And that averages about 2 people per day. And over the last 10 years, the number of ladder-related injuries has increased 50%. And that's quite alarming. And that's why I think doing this webinar and focusing on ladders is important, because we think of ladders are every day. You see, you probably have 1 or 2 ladders in your house. You have any reasonably sized printing operation is going to have maybe 1 or 2 ladders. If you're a larger printing operation, you might have a fixed ladder where you're using that to access a roof or to access elevated areas like HVAC systems or things like that. I mean, ladders they're everywhere. I mean, they're rather ubiquitous, and we don't think much about them until you start looking at these stats. Now, the Bureau of Labor Statistics did a study of 1,400 ladder accidents, and again, this kind of backs up NIOSH's classification in terms of where we're seeing these injuries. And again, some of these are quite alarming. And if you look at the numbers, I'm not going to run through all of them. If you look at the numbers, you can see that there's some commonality, and you can see why OSHA has changed the ladder requirements when it comes to the walking working services regulations, because of the sheer number of injuries that are occurring and how those are occurring. So really 73%, the very last one is quite alarming. 73% had not been provided with or consulted written instructions on the safe use of ladders. In other words, people weren't trained how to use those ladders. Vast majority, 66%, weren't trained how to inspect them, and then 57% were holding something while they're climbing a ladder. Again, one of the basic premises of climbing a ladder is to not have something in your hands. You maintain what's called a 3-point contact. So from OSHA's perspective, they believe that 100% of all ladder accidents could be prevented if proper attention was provided to equipment and climber training were provided. And clearly, again, this is what's driving the changes that OSHA has. So the key in terms of the OSHA requirements are really illustrated on this slide. First and foremost, what OSHA has laid out in the new walking working services regulations is that number one, you must inspect all ladders before initial use on each work shift. And again, each work shift before initial use as necessary. What's interesting about the OSHA requirement is they've defined an action, which is an inspection. They've defined a frequency, which is basically before initial use on each work shift. And then they don't require you to document that, which is very interesting. So how are they going to enforce this? Well, essentially the way they enforce this would be the way to enforce other requirements. For example, with forklifts or powered industrial trucks, those are also have a pre-use or pre-shift inspection requirement. Nothing is required to be documented, but if they come in and do an inspection and find a defective ladder, they find braces that are bent or missing feet, or they see that there's something in terms of amiss with the ladder, then you're going to get a citation because that ladder either needs to be tagged, dangerous, do not use, taken out of service, or it needs to be thrown away if there's damage or you're using it properly. Employees must be trained in the proper selection of ladders, and we're going to get into some of that, and then the proper use for ascending and descending ladders, and we'll get into some of those requirements as well. Because I wasn't quite sure if everyone understood the world of ladders, I thought we'd take a little bit of time before we get into some of the specifics to talk about ladders. Obviously, step ladders are the most common ones that we see. Platform ladders. Now, platform ladders we see in facilities, primarily those that are attached with wheels. You see the portable. If you see that, basically, I view them as portable steps is one way to look at it, but essentially those are considered platform ladders. Articulated or multi-purpose. That's what you see down in the lower right-hand corner. Those are like the ones that you see that you can extend them, you can expand them, you can make different shapes out of them. Those are articulated ladders. You have straight ladders, and those are the common straight ladders that you see. And then on top, and then a form of a straight ladder, from my perspective, is an extension ladder. You see 2 or 3 adjustable sections that allow you to extend that ladder. And then the last are the fixed ladders, the permanently attached to some wall or to a tank. What we typically see in our members' operations is that those fixed ladders are attached to a wall, and they allow access typically to a roof, although we were just in a facility where they had a fixed ladder that allowed them to go up to a platform that had their HVAC equipment internally to the facility. So generally what we see those fixed ladders are those that you go up to the roof. Portable ladders, just a quick anatomy of a ladder. We have the top shelf or top step. We have braces, which are down along the side. We have steps, obviously, that allow us to climb up the ladder. Very important, anti-slip feet. You have the rail systems and then the spreaders and spreader lock. So the spreader bars and the locking bars are those which keep that step ladder locked in an open position. And very important when you're using those, make sure that those stay locked. Straight ladders, extension ladders, essentially somewhat similar in that they have side rails, they have rungs. One difference with extension ladders is that there's rung locks. So as you extend that part of the ladder up, it will come back down and lock that upper piece into a lower piece with the rung locks that'll clamp around that rung, and then those have to be released in order to take the ladder down. And another difference is that you have a pulley and a rope that allows you to actually pull that part that you're going to extend, allow you to pull that up as you extend that ladder. So selecting a ladder, some key considerations: load, height, and construction. Those are essentially the 3 most important aspects of selecting a ladder, and we're going to talk about those. You need to select a ladder that's designed to hold the necessary load, including the worker and equipment. And you'll see in the next slide that there's a way that you can determine what the capacity of that ladder is going to be, because ANSI, American National Standards Institute, requires that a duty rating sticker be placed on those ladders, which provide that weight limit. And then also very interesting, another fun fact that I learned as digging into this, is don't assume that a longer ladder actually has a higher duty rating. There's absolutely no relationship between the length of a ladder and the duty rating. In terms of the construction, most ladders are manufactured from wood, aluminum, or fiberglass. All the ones I've ever seen in our facilities are made from one of those 3 materials. Each of them, believe it or not, has a very specific purpose when it comes to conditions of exposure. So, for example, if you're going to be storing your ladders outdoors, you definitely wouldn't want to use a wooden ladder, because a wooden ladder is going to be exposed to the elements. It's going to deteriorate a lot more rapidly than, say, an aluminum or fiberglass. application. What we see here, for example, in this image, is you see an aluminum ladder that's been, it's an extension ladder that's been put up and to allow someone to access the roof. And you can see it's close to very almost on top of the power that's coming into this facility. So in this particular instance, you would not use an aluminum ladder. In fact, you probably wouldn't want to be as close as you can to that as possible, because again, another thing that I learned is that wooden ladders are actually considered conductive because of the metal bracing and framing. And wooden ladders can actually get wet because of water getting underneath the protective coating. But also, as we were doing some digging on this question, we found that even a fiberglass, now the recommended ladder for working near or on electrical components is fiberglass, but it has to be dry, because even a wet fiberglass ladder, even though it's considered non-conductive, can actually conduct electricity. So duty ratings. Duty ratings are basically the weight limit that a ladder can handle capacity. What you typically see, if you go to Home Depot and you buy a ladder for your house, you'll see the duty rating and the red down at the bottom, type 3, basically a 200-pound limit. And you'll see on that type of rating, you'll see it's considered household use. Once we move beyond household use, we're into commercial use, industrial use, extra heavy duty, and special duty. The key thing here is that when you look for the work that you're doing, the type of work that you're doing, you need to take into consideration the weight of the person who's going to be on that ladder, as well as the weight or the amount of tools that they may be carrying with them when they get on that ladder. Now, how do we know what the duty rating is? Every ladder that you purchase will have what's called a duty rating sticker. Again, ANSI is driving this requirement, and you can see based on this image that this is a fiberglass ladder. It has a 300-pound capacity. It's a type 1A duty rating on the ladder. So very important that when you use a ladder, prior to using a ladder, you need to make sure that the duty rating sticker is on the ladder, and then also legible, because over time, of course, with using ladders and such, you know, that sticker can become unreadable. So it's very important to make sure that you understand what the duty ratings are. Height. All right, our second factor consideration, height. Now, you might say, oh, this is a pretty straightforward type of thing. I have to get on a ladder and change a light bulb, right? Well, it's not that straightforward, because the first thing we have to take into consideration is the height of the area to be accessed. Then we have to look at the height of the person using the ladder. And you might say, well, what's it matter how tall the person is using a ladder? I'm just getting a ladder out and I'm going to go change my light bulb. Well, that's because when you have ladders and you're using them, depending upon the type of ladder, you do not want to stand on the very top shelf on a step ladder, for example. You want to actually be standing on the second step down from the top, because that provides the most stability. If you think back to the video that we just saw, that person was actually standing on the second step of a step ladder, which makes for a very unstable situation. And obviously he was leaning up, I think he was changing a light bulb, leaning up to work on some fixture, and then lost his balance and came down off that ladder. A very, very dramatic fall. For straight ladders, extension ladders, you don't want to stand on the top 3 rungs. Then if I have an extension ladder, I have to worry about something called overlap. So in other words, when I'm going to extend a part of my extension ladder, I'm going to have that second section that I'm going to extend up. I can't put it on the very top rung. I have to provide enough space so that I have a stable ladder. And then placement. If I have a straight or extension ladder placement, I have to be concerned about where that ladder goes, especially if I'm going to be using to access an upper area, which is basically above the location, like a ledge, a floor, overhang, like I'm going up on a roof. I need to make sure I have a 3-foot extension. And then when I'm putting my straight ladder or my extension ladder up, I have to worry about the angle at which I'm putting that up. So a quick rule of thumb is that for step ladders, you need to measure the highest point you need to reach, subtract your height from your working height, and then add 2 feet. And because that can involve some math, we found some charts that you can use. And these are pretty consistent in terms of looking at recommendations for step ladder length. And again, understand on the left-hand side, the person that's doing the work needs to be 2 steps down. So you don't want to be on that top shelf. You don't want to be in the second shelf down. You want to be 2 steps down. So when you take that into account, so for example, if I need to reach a 12-foot, reach up 12 feet, I need an 8-foot extension ladder because my highest standing level is going to be about 5 foot 8 inches. So that's how you kind of would read this chart. This chart assumes a person of 5 foot 9 inches and a vertical reach of 12 inches, which is pretty common or pretty typical for most people. But again, you need to take into account, how high I have to reach, where I need to be staying on the ladder as a determining factor. Now, straight ladders, extension ladders, again, a little bit different because we're using that for a different reason. That's why we get into the purpose of these ladders. So what we need to do is look at the highest point. We have to add 20%. Why? Because you'll see in the slide the angle at which we need to set this ladder up at to create the proper angle needed for stability. I need to subtract the overlap and then add 3 feet if I'm going above, say, a roof line or a ledge where I'm going to be going above. And I have a couple photos to show you later to illustrate that point. But in essence, what we did with the chart for the step ladders, we have a similar chart for the straight or extension ladders, and it gives you an idea in terms of a starting point. Of course, you'd have to adjust that based on the person using it and heights, but it gives you an idea in terms of where you are with respect to extending that second section and taking into account the overlap. Now, from a safety perspective, the overlap for extension ladders depends upon the length of the ladder as well as the type of ladder. So when you look at a ladder, say up to 32 feet, you need a 3-foot overlap. So I need to take that into account when I look at trying to size a ladder or purchase a ladder for the particular job that I'm going to be using it. Now, damaged or defective ladders. As we said, OSHA requires us to inspect our ladders prior to use, looking for visible defects. If a defective ladder is found, immediately mark it defective, tag it, dangerous, do not use, or take it out of service. You can see in this photo on the right-hand side, this is a fixed ladder and it's missing a rung. So technically, this person should not be even thinking about climbing this ladder with a missing rung. Chances are it's probably been missing for, this isn't new, it's been missing there for quite a while. So if OSHA were to come in and inspect the facility, see a ladder of this nature with a rung that's missing and no tag on it and a tag not to use it, you're going to be expecting to see a citation. Again, we need to make sure we're withdrawing those ladders prior to use. So what's involved in a ladder inspection? Well, that's why we wanted to maybe go through the anatomy of a ladder to give you an idea of what to look for. A couple things. One, the duty rating sticker, as we said, needs to be intact and readable. The rungs and steps need to be free from slip hazards. So if you have folks that are using ladders and maybe they're lubricating equipment, or maybe they're having to use it outside and they've got mud on the rungs, or they've got oil or grease that's spilled on the rungs. We need to make sure that those there's no slip hazards involved with those. We need to make sure the side rails are intact and not broken. The feet are not rounded. And I see a lot of these. I see a lot of wooden ladders where the hardware, jumping down with the hardware, the braces are just basically shot. The whole thing's wobbly. And then because wooden ladders, over a period of time, they get used and reused, the feet become very rounded. That's why my preference is to use ladders with the anti-slip pads. But again, you need to make sure that those anti-slip pads or those solid feet are in fact intact and not broken. And you make sure the bolts and rivets are in place. The ladder locking mechanism works on a step ladder. And then if you have an extension ladder, test the rope and pulley for the extension ladder, because again, it's part of the whole hardware system associated with it. A couple things to think about in terms of the types of ladders. Fiberglass, you want to inspect for chips, cracks, and what's called blooming. And that's a term where pieces of the exposed fiberglass come out where the resin has deteriorated. Typically, you see that on ladders that are used outdoors and are stored outdoors. So if you store your fiberglass ladder outdoors, you want to pay particular attention to make sure that the fiberglass in of itself is not beginning to break down. Aluminum, you want to check for dents and bends and missing slip-resistant feet. Loose rungs, again, also same with wooden ladders. You look for loosened rungs. You look for the metal brackets and supports to be intact and not wobbly. And then paint, do not ever paint a wooden ladder, because paint can hide cracks and other signs of wear. You can put a clear finish on a wooden ladder, but you never want to paint over a wooden ladder because, again, you can't see behind the paint. For fixed ladders, when you're looking at a fixed ladder, you want to check closely and carefully for damage. Obviously, the image we had before showed a rung that was missing, but you're looking for loose, worn, damaged rungs or side rails. You look for corroded or broken loose anchors. One facility we were in where unfortunately, it's hard to describe without an image, but on the other side of the wall, someone had driven a forklift into the wall and drove the wall into the fixed ladder. In essence, what it did is it prevented you from climbing that fixed ladder safely because you could not get your foot completely across the rung. You almost had to think about climbing up on your tippy toes. So even though the ladder itself was intact and the anchors weren't damaged, because someone had pushed the wall in behind it, it was extremely unsafe to climb up that ladder, and that had to be corrected, or else you wouldn't be able to use that ladder. Fixed ladders should be inspected on a regular scheduled basis by a competent person, and ideally, there's again nothing in terms of the regulations. Ideally, you want to have that done, I would say, at least on an annual basis, and then the inspector must have the ability to tie off with fall protection when they're doing that inspection, because it isn't just them climbing it. They're going to take a good hard look at that fixed ladder. Placement's very important. So you need to set the ladder up on firm, stable, level surface. You want to level and even ground. If you can't, you want to look at perhaps nailing some cleats or coming up with a way to anchor the feet from slipping out. Again, when looking at the statistics, there was a high number of injuries resulted from the ladder feet slipping out while someone was actually on top of the ladder. And if you've seen some of America's Funniest Home Videos, you can see some people doing things like that. We send out to our members on our environmental health and safety listserv photos of the week, and a lot of photos a week are people doing really, really dangerous things with ladders where if you look down, not to place them on boxes, barrels, or scaffolds or on unstable bases. It's amazing to me how people can somehow justify to themselves that putting a ladder on the end of a front loader being lifted up to the edge of a building is somehow a safe thing to do. Or people using ladders that are going down steps. You have one person holding part of the ladder on a step ladder, holding the back side of it while somebody's on it. And then what happened is, actually there's a video of that. What happened is a guy drops him and the guy falls down. He was hanging if you Google it, you can see he was hanging a chandelier, and it didn't turn out very good for the guy on top of the ladder. But you don't want to fasten ladders together. And again, we've seen photos of that. Unless it's designed, unless it's like, for example, an extension ladder. And of course, before you get on a ladder, you stand on a lower rung to test the ladder to make sure that the footing is actually secure. This is what I'm talking about for placement. So when you have a straight ladder or you have an extension ladder, the requirement is basically what they say the 4-to-1 rule. So for every 4 feet up, you want 5 foot out. When you put a ladder up in this manner, when you have a ladder that's set at the 4-to-1 rule, essentially you're putting a ladder at about a 75 to 80 degree angle. That gives you maximum stability for a fixed or a straight ladder. If you have it in closer to the structure that you're climbing, obviously it's a much steeper angle and it's very unstable. And if you put it at a lower, in other words, if you extend it out, say, 6-to-1 or 8-to-1, you end up with the ladder being almost horizontal. In that particular instance, that makes it extremely unstable for the feet. So in other words, the bottom of that becomes very unstable. So when you're setting up a straight ladder or an extension ladder, you remember the 4-to-1 rule. So for every 4 feet up, I want to be 1 foot out. Here's an example of a ladder that's incorrectly placed, because when I have a straight ladder and extension ladder, you can see the person's accessing an elevated area. This ladder needs to extend 3 feet above that area that you're accessing. So in this particular instance, obviously the person that's going to climb the ladder is going to have to step on that very last rung to actually get up on that elevated surface. And we know what happens when we stand on that top rung, or actually the rungs down below that. We know it's extremely unstable. And so again, this is not the proper placement for a straight or an extension ladder. Step ladders. Step ladders, number one, only use them when the spreader arms are locked. That's going to give you maximum stability. Now, what's interesting is if you look at the photo on the far right, you can see that this particular gentleman is using a step ladder as a straight ladder. And that is strictly forbidden because that step ladder is not designed to act as a straight ladder. Back to our selection process. I need to make sure I'm using the right ladder for the right job. So in this particular instance, he is way incorrect. Now, he's only standing on the lower rung of that ladder, but if he were higher up on that ladder, you can see easily how that thing would be unstable and it could slide out from under him. And again, if you look on Google, you can find a lot of videos where ladders fall out from behind, ladders are falling out while people are standing on them. And this is one particular reason why you don't use a step ladder as a straight ladder, because of the instability that it brings. You also want to be careful with step ladders because usually those are used internally. You want to be aware of doors. You don't want to set a step ladder up, have somebody stand on it, and have someone open a door right into them. Bam, the person's coming off the ladder. So in that particular instance, if you're near a door, you can have a guard. You can have someone that is posted there while a person's working on a ladder to keep people from walking through it. Ideally, you could lock the door to make sure the door doesn't swing open. And also, when you're working with ladders in your facility, one thing that I would suggest, and I didn't really put it in the slides, but as I thought about this presentation, you could set up some orange cones around the area where people are using a ladder, just as a warning. They say, never walk underneath a ladder that's open, because it's 7 years of bad luck. I mean, I would be concerned about somebody dropping something on me walking underneath a ladder. But if you look at, for example, my brother-in-law works for Comcast Cable. He's a cable guy. But what's interesting is that every time that they're out using their ladders, they put out orange cones around the area that they're working, just as a warning to let people know that, hey, someone's working in this area. We've got orange cones out. Be cautious of what's going on with respect to these ladders. Now, climbing the ladder. Climbing a ladder, as I talked about, alluded to, is that you have to have what's called 3-point contact at all times. Very important. Obviously, face the ladder when you ascend or descend the ladder. That provides the greatest stability in terms of going up and down a ladder. But the 3-point contact basically means I have both feet in one hand or one foot in both hands. So at all times, I am as anchored as I possibly can to that ladder while I'm going up and down the ladder. So again, the 3-point contact, when you train folks, you need to make sure that they're following that. What that really means, obviously, is that I can't be carrying stuff with me. And you see people all the time on ladders carrying loads. In that particular instance, you want to be hoisting the loads up to wherever you're going. You can carry tools with you, but not in your hands. That's where you have a tool belt or a pouch that comes in handy. And obviously, as we have alluded to, you don't want to use the two highest steps. And if you look at the image on the far right-hand side, another good recommendation is that to make sure that when you look at your ladder prior to use, you pay attention to all the warning stickers that are on the ladder, because there are warning stickers that they put on there to help reinforce where you should stand, to make sure, for example, if you have a paint tray on a step ladder, that paint tray, that's not a platform ladder. Paint tray is designed to hold a can of paint. It's not designed to hold an adult human being, so you don't stand on the paint tray, even though you might be tempted to do that because you might be straddling the ladder, for example. You never want to straddle a ladder, but we do see people that do that. Again, just to reiterate, never stand on the top step of the ladder, and never stand on the second step below the top step from the ladder. Very important, because at this height, you are in an extremely unstable position. Even the slightest movement, you are going to come off that ladder, and it's not going to turn out to be very good. Now, once I'm up, or if I'm on my ladder, they call it the belt buckle rule. Basically, that means that my belt buckle, I need to be within the rails of the ladder. I don't want to be leaning over the ladder. If you look at this gentleman on the top right-hand side of the image, you see that, first of all, he's clearly doesn't have 3-point contact. He's got, at best, 2-point contact, leaning out past the rail, reaching something at that window, and is clearly in an unstable position and is susceptible to coming off that ladder or bringing the ladder down with him. Also, always face the ladder when you perform work. So the one in the lower right-hand corner, this gentleman is actually turned around opposite the ladder. And if you think about it, the rung above him, the step above him, is actually pushing his feet out. So not only is he unstable, but because the way that the ladder is physically constructed, it's actually pushing him out and throwing off his center of balance. And again, it's not a good situation to be in. You don't overreach. And in fact, that's a lot of the accidents. Back to the statistics, a lot of people get up on ladders and like, oh man, if I could just had another inch or two. So what happens, they end up overreaching, and when they do that, they throw their center of gravity off, and therefore they're subject to falling. If you need to move your ladder, you don't bounce it, you don't hop the ladder, you climb down, reposition the ladder correctly, and get back up on it. And likewise, you don't lean too far back or too far forward. So when you're overreaching can be either forward or backward. And more instances are not reaching backward, which it looks like the gentleman on the video is doing, throws you in a more unstable position and subject to a fall. Storage, of course, ladders, we use those. Believe it or not, you're most relying upon your life when you figure that 2 people a day are killed with ladders. So your life depends upon how you treat your ladder. Your life depends upon how you use your ladder. Your life depends upon the care of that ladder. So storage becomes very important. We need to make sure our ladders are stored for easy access and inspection. We don't want to store them vertically if possible. If not, we want to store them horizontally, supporting the ladder at several points to avoid the ladder from sagging or becoming damaged. And of course, we want to protect our ladders from heat, weather, and other corrosive materials. Again, so depending upon where you store ladders, most facilities I'm in are going to store their ladders inside, but you want to also store them ideally away from areas where they can be damaged. A lot of times we see ladders that are they're stored in the loading dock area, and you want to make sure, it's out of the way of traffic, especially, some folks aren't so great at driving forklifts because we see a lot of damaged racking. You don't want them running into the ladder, because typically when someone hits something with a forklift, unless it's noticeable at the point that it happens, nobody ever says anything. So you don't want to be concerned about someone running into a ladder, causing a ladder to be damaged, and then you don't see it, pull the ladder out, begin to use it, and bam, you got problems. So, just be careful about in terms of where you're storing your ladders. You want to be cognizant of where those ladders are going to be, and what damage could actually come or potentially come from the storage of those ladders. Okay, fixed ladders. Again, fixed ladders, very, very interesting in terms of what OSHA has done with respect to fixed ladders. The standard essentially was, and you'll see it's changing, but the standard basically was that if I had a fixed ladder that was more than 24 feet, I had to put a cage or at the top of the ladder. Most of the instances for our members, there are always going to be ladders that are going up, as I said, up to a roof or access a much higher area. And we see a lot of cages on fixed ladders because that was the regulation, that was the standard. OSHA, when they changed the regulation, thought this through and realized that cages are not necessarily the best way to prevent someone from falling. And you say, well, why would that be? Well, because cages, the purpose of a cage is not designed to stop someone from falling. Basically, it's designed to control the fall. What I mean by that is if you have someone that's climbing up to the top of a fixed ladder, they get up there, say they lose their balance and they fall backwards. Well, the cage isn't going to stop them from falling. It's just going to deliver them to the foot of the ladder at the landing where that ladder began. So as OSHA thought through this and said, man, we really want to prevent people from falling. We want to prevent people from getting injured from working with ladders, especially fixed ladders. We need to change this regulation. So what they've done is they've requiring now new ladders that are installed. And again, the dates are important here because we're quickly coming up on the date. The first date we need to pay attention to is November 19th of 2018. So any ladder installed after November 19th of 2018 is considered a new ladder, and it's not allowed to have a cage system. Basically, what that means is that new ladders must have a personal either a ladder safety system or personal fall arrest system associated with it. Those are those installed after November 19th, 2018. Ladders that are erected before November 19, 2018 are considered existing ladders. So an existing ladder, you have some time. You have until November 18th of 2036 to retrofit that ladder. So in other words, if I have an existing ladder and it's greater than 24 feet, and it's currently in place, I have until November 18th of 2036 to retrofit that with a ladder safety system or a personal fall arrest system. Any ladder that I install after November of this year must have a ladder safety system or personal fall arrest system associated with that ladder. I can no longer put a cage around that. Then, so I'm somewhere in between. If I have an existing ladder, isn't required to be retrofitted, but say, for example, it has to be repaired. Say we find as the photo we had, there was a missing rung, or we had a rail issue or something. It had to be repaired or replaced. It automatically becomes considered a new ladder, and I have to have a ladder safety system or personal fall arrest system installed with that ladder. So you may be asking the question, well, what does a ladder safety system look like? Well, here's two examples. The one on the left is a cable-based system where the operator or the person climbing is going to put on a harness, and they're going to connect themselves to a cable. And on the right-hand side, there's a rigid track, which has a ladder lifeline. So when we look at our ladders and we look at our facilities, and again, as I said, we've been paying way more attention since this regulation came out about fixed ladders and where people are, and getting our measuring tapes out. So one thing, if you have a fixed ladder, one thing I strongly suggest after this webinar, and as soon as you get a chance, get out your measuring tape and see how far you are. The key is 24 feet. If it's 24 feet or less, I don't need a cage, I don't need a safety system. But if I'm 24 feet or greater, I have to have a cage if it's existing, and if it's new, I need to install it with either a system like this or have some other type of personal fall arrest system where if I have a person climbing up a ladder, if they fall, they're not going to fall to the bottom of the ladder, they're going to be caught. Now, very important, while you have to have this requirement, you also have to think through what happens if somebody does fall. So therefore, you need a rescue plan. If you have someone who falls while they're climbing a fixed ladder, you can't let them dangle there. So how are you going to get that person down? So you need to think through this. If you have a fixed ladder, what are you going to do in the event of someone falling? And you don't necessarily can rely upon the fire department, so to speak, although, of course, the fire department EMS response can be part of it. You need to think this through in terms of, if I have someone dangling there, how are we going to get that person down? Maybe you need to buy a step ladder, or maybe you need to purchase some other type of equipment to try and get those folks down from that ladder. But again, think about what you're going to do in the event of. Also, another very important part of the fixed ladder fall protection program is that now if I have a fixed ladder that takes me up and I have going up in, say, accessing a roof, and I have a roof penetration with a hatch, I have to provide a guardrail system, and that guardrail system must have a self-closing gate behind it. Now, OSHA was very specific in terms of having a self-closing gate, and most importantly, saying that safety chains and swing gates are not allowed. So it has to be a self-closing gate. OSHA's purpose for this is that if someone climbs up that hatch, they access the roof, they don't want them falling back through that hole that I've now created by lifting up the hatch. So we've actually had, I'd say, at least a good 8, 9, 10 members I know that have reported back to me that they've gone ahead and installed a safety system, a railing system with a self-closing gate where they've had the roof penetrations for their fixed ladders. Now, very important, even though my ladder may not be 24 feet, and again, we're getting questions on this, say it's 20 feet, but I still have a roof hatch, I still have to provide this rail system and self-closing gate. If it's 24 feet or less, right, or up to 24 feet or greater, if it's up to 24 feet, I don't need a ladder safety system, but I definitely need to think about where my ladder ends up on my facility and what I have to be providing in terms of the safety for someone not fall back through the opening that's in there. So, I don't know, Marcy, if you want to take it from here, or do we want to split this one?
No, we do have some questions,
Okay.
and so I was telling them we would be getting to the questions shortly. But I
Yep.
will say that, yes, I do want to remind everyone that we do have the next walking and working surfaces regulation coming up on June 21st, and it's going to cover
Yep.
fall protection. Now, as Gary and I both know, most do not understand that fall protection impacts all facilities. It's not just for those that might be installing something at a high level, but this also looks at any maintenance you have on your rooftop. So we really do encourage you to tune in to that final webinar in this series, and you can find the registration for that on sgia.org looking under the events section. And so Gary has the Safety Shield program from Printing Industries of America, and SGIA has its Safety Recognition program, where we're encouraging. Right, so you want to tell them a bit about Safety Shield?
Yeah, I was just saying, from an organizational perspective, SGIA, PIA, one of the things that we really, really want our members to be is safe, right? So we've created a recognition program. SGIA, Marcy's group has a recognition program. We here at PIA have a recognition program for our respective members to get, to really get recognition. We have a lot of our members that do things correctly, and we want to encourage people. We want to encourage all of our members to do things correctly from a safety perspective. The program that we have here at PIA it's called the Best Workplace, part of what's called Best Workplaces in America's recognition program, which extends to your HR policies and places to work, and then as part of that, you can apply for what's called the Safety Shield designation. So it's an optional component, but if you want to get involved in our program, you have to apply first through the BWA, and then you apply for a Safety Shield recognition. And it is we look at it as almost a virtual compliance assessment of your company from a safety perspective. It's both regulatory as well as what you're doing with your policies and procedures. And I think, Marcy, your program's very similar to that one, correct?
Right, it's similar. Ours is more of a year-round event. And through the Safety Recognition Program, facilities sign up at the beginning of the year, and it's a point-based system. So when the participants do a safety activity, such as attending this webinar program, they obtain points towards the goal of 80 points or more, and then you receive the Safety Recognition Award. And it's an annual program, runs on a calendar year. And as it is a points-based program, we do have a little bit of a competition. And so the top 3-point earners from a company basis do receive a special award. I will also say that throughout we have extra activities. So within the Safety Recognition Program, there is a bi-monthly checklist similar to what Gary's program has. It's not a wall-to-wall compliance assessment checklist, but it's a methodology for you to use with your safety committee to keep safety in the forefront, to take a look at those key items within your workplace that might cause you an issue. There's points awarded for training programs, such as ladder safety. I know, see, I can connect it. There's points awarded as well for posting your OSHA form summary on the required time period. And so we do offer these tidbits, and we offer safety tips on a monthly basis as a means to keep safety integrated within your facility, because safety is important. It does impact your bottom line. If you have a really good, strong safety program, you do get that positive feedback. So we encourage you to check out both the Safety Shield as well as the Safety Recognition Program. More information can be found by emailing either Gary or myself, and I believe our emails are at the end of this program.
Yep. Right
there we go.
Speaking of.
I know.
Yep.
Aha. So Gary, we do have a couple of questions.
All right, great.
So one is damaged ladders. So what are you allowed to fix on a damaged ladder in order to continue to use it? Or can you fix the damaged ladder? Because I know you were talking about ladders that were damaged and not to use them, but can you fix them and then use them, or should they just be taken totally out of service?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's nothing in the regulations that prevent you from repairing a damaged ladder. So
Hmm.
depending upon the ladder, what's wrong with it, and of course, obviously the big one is the cost associated with repairing it. You can certainly repair it. So for example, if you had the locking mechanism on a wooden ladder, was loose, you could replace that to make sure that it was still tight. If you had a foot, a slip-resistant foot that became damaged or was removed, or somehow otherwise made inoperable, you could certainly replace that. So
Hmm.
I would say depend upon the damage. If you had a side brace, for example, and say it was fiberglass and it cracked, at that point I'm thinking, I wouldn't feel nervous about trying to repair that. I think I would probably just throw that one away and get a new one. So I think it would depend upon the extent of the damage, but there's nothing that prevents you from repairing them or returning them to service. In fact, that's to be encouraged versus leaving one out there that has something wrong with it and allowing people to use it.
Good. So another question is about ladder classification. So what ladder classification would a ladder that is attached to a cart be considered? So if you have I guess a ladder attached to some sort of a cart, is that a fixed, obviously not a
I'm
fixed
going to
ladder?
go with, I mean, if the car, well, that question requires a few questions. But
Okay.
if the cart's mobile, I'm thinking it's more of a platform type.
Mhm.
It would fall in a category of a platform ladder. If I'm trying to envision, I'd have to maybe see what the question is, but I would say that I think it's going to be considered a portable ladder if you can move it around. I would assume that that's would be the case in that particular instance. That would be because a fixed ladder, as the name implies, is something that's going to be physically
Right.
attached to a building or a tank. Oh, one other thing too, I skipped over this and it's in the slide. Very important for fixed ladders, and I know we do run into this in with our members on certain types of presses. There are ladders that people use to access different parts of the press. Those particular type of fixed ladders are exempt from the regulations. So in other words,
Hmm.
if it's a ladder that's built into the equipment itself, that doesn't fall under the regulations. Those are considered exempt. But I think in what the question from the person who raised it, I think it's going to be probably a platform ladder. I would think because if it's mobile, I call them mobile steps, but the technical term are platform ladders. So if you think about
Hmm.
something like that, I think
Okay.
that's going to be where it's going to fall.
All right. And so documentation, we do love to talk about documentation because as you and I say, in all things we just trust documentation. So what type of documentation needs to be maintained?
Well, that's a good question. OSHA, was I would say maybe purposely absent on this topic regarding ladder
Hmm.
inspections and training. As we know, and our mantra is, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. It didn't exist. So I strongly recommend that you do document the fact that you're doing ladder inspections. I highly recommend when you do ladder training that you document the fact you're doing ladder training. You have sign-off sheets. You keep copies of the outlines. You keep copies of materials that you've trained your employees on in terms of working safely with ladders. There's a couple of things that I've seen. Some of our members, there's one of the slides I went through, and I'm not sure what number it's on, but there's inspection tags that
Hmm.
we've seen that people have started using where they hang an inspection tag on the ladder itself and they sign off on when it was inspected. And that's something that can be done very easily. And what we part of the package of information and the handouts that we've provided with this whole walking working services is that and I encourage you guys to download it. We have a ladder, a comprehensive ladder checklist, and then we have a per use checklist. So you could go through that checklist, and then sign off on the tag that's hanging on the ladder. obviously that's going to demonstrate your commitment to ensuring that the ladders being used have been inspected at some frequency and are in proper working order. So I'm a big proponent of documentation because in most instances, unfortunately, as an employer, you have to show and demonstrate through some way that you're meeting the requirements, and documentation is the best way to do it.
Right, and that's really one of the driving, I guess, forces behind us developing the checklists and the other handouts that we have here is when we
Right.
find that when OSHA is silent on an issue, it does not necessarily mean they can't cite you, because we do have the general duty clause. And as Gary so knowingly showed us in the video, ladder safety really can cause accidents. And anytime you have an accident or anything of that nature, oftentimes OSHA shows up at your facility. So it is best to, at some point, to be a little more overcautious than not. I would say.
Well, I would say too, Marcy, along the lines of documentation, because as we were talking about this, a question a couple of times I've gotten this one recently is, well, what happens if we don't use that ladder? Do we have to still inspect it? And the issue is it's a per use or per shift. So, for example, you have 3 ladders. And you use one frequently, well, then that needs to be inspected. But one sits there for a month, right? So you only need to inspect it prior to you don't have to inspect it just to inspect it. The frequency is defined as a pre-use or per use basis. So if it's a ladder you don't use frequently, you don't have to inspect it and do a ladder inspection form or tag every time just because you're inspecting the other ladders. So that should also help alleviate some administrative burdens, because it's a per use frequency.
Right. Oh, good. Well, that ends our questions and also our time today on ladder safety. Again, I encourage you to sign up for the last in our series on fall protection. On June 21st, it can be accessed through sgia.org down on the event tab under webinars. So I encourage you to take a look at that. And if you do have any questions at all about the program today, you have Gary's and or myself's email address, and we encourage you to reach out to us, because we do love to share this information with you. And with that, I thank you, Gary. As always, great program.
Yep.
And
all right. Well, thank you, Marcy. Thanks everyone for attending. So.
And if you need to get a hold of us, you have our contact information. Talk to everyone soon.